All right, cool.
Cool. Yeah, no, this is this whole project has kind of come together in a really cool way. I talked to Michelle from Voivod yesterday, and Tom G and Angel Ripper, and a whole bunch of journalists. Got Mortiz involved, and talking to Jeff Mantis tomorrow. So
nice.
Yeah, so it's going to be a neat little episode, and then Mark and I are actually going to record tomorrow afternoon after the Jeff interview. So today I'm trying to pull all the threads together to make some sense of all this madness.
What's the deal? It's like the 40th anniversary of black metal or something, right?
Yeah, that's kind of, with Requiem, what we've tried to do is, because of my history teacher background, that obviously Mark, is the comic book artist, try and kind of do a lot of historical context and stuff. And so we kind of saw an opportunity. We've never done a Venom episode. So it's like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's try and do something like this. We did something for Neurosis through Silver for their 25th anniversary a couple years, and got a lot of testimonials, and seemed to work. People dug it. So it's like, fuck it. Let's go in, make it happen. Nice. So, all right. Cool.
So this is going to be a podcast.
Yeah. So we're editing up all the audio clips into the sets that Mark and I are doing and stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure what we were doing. So
yeah, that's kind of the gist. And I've been kind of
for a few sound bites. So we'll just talk, and then you can pull
out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And just to make, usually what I do is what I've been telling people, because it's easier on Mark because he does all the editing, is when I ask a question, I'll probably just kind of let you run with it, and I won't interrupt you, because if he tries to edit me out, so make it easier on him. So I guess let's start with, how did you discover Venom, and kind of where were you in your musical and metal evolution? And were you playing music by the time you discovered Venom, or just kind of your origin story, I guess, with the band and where you were at?
Yeah, I discovered Venom through my obsession with the new wave of British heavy metal, which, slowly, or actually pretty rapidly, I suppose, led me to more extreme music, because I heard Iron Maiden and Def Leppard and stuff like that in the beginning, and then Angel Witch and Witchfinder General, and next thing you know, I was buying Welcome to Hell, and of course Ace of Spades was probably the record that really opened my eyes to just incredibly raw music was Ace of Spades. So then I was, when I heard Welcome to Hell, I just instantly loved it. I bought it at Wyatt Earp Records in Flint, Michigan, and it was with a high school buddy named Bill Cook. And when we went in the store, I saw black metal sitting on the shelf. It was a brand new, I'm sorry. I saw Welcome to Hell sitting on the shelf, and it was a brand new release at the time. And I grabbed it, I was like, this is what I'm buying today. I was so excited to hear it that I couldn't wait to get home. So I asked Doug if he would play it on the stereo. This was probably the third or fourth time I went into Wyatt Earp. So I had a little bit of a relationship going with Doug already. So I asked him boldly if he would just play the record in the store. And he gladly, opened it up and put the record on the turntable. And him and I were just howling, we were fucking blown away by just how trashy and raw and satanic it was. And my friend Bill, who was with us, just looked at me and was like, man, you've gone too far. And the great thing was Doug responded with, that's the same thing my friend said to me when I played them the first Black Sabbath record. So Venom made an instant impact on me. And when black metal came out, I was waiting for it with open arms. And I walked into a record store on the north end of Flint called Grapevine. They had a really amazing import section. And I saw black metal sitting there. I hadn't read any coming soon. Back then it was 1982. Kerrang was our only, or Sounds or NME were our only, windows into that world. So I just saw it unannounced sitting there on the shelf, and I was like, oh shit, a new Venom record. And I bought it, of course, instantly took it home. It was, I want to say it was winter time, right? Was it released in winter of 82? Yeah. So I remember being cold outside. I was in my room at my parents' house by myself, and I put the record on, and I was just completely fucking blown away and so pleased, because it was like, you know, they had advanced their musicianship a little bit, just enough, and the production value was just a little bit better. Like everything that you may have been like about Welcome to Hell, like, man, this could be a little bit better. They improved in all those areas, and like, you know, you could understand the lyrics better, and they were better lyrics as well. The playing, like Mantis's guitar playing on that record is just phenomenal, and the bass tone and Kronos's voice, and the little bit of reverb that's on there that makes it sound like they're recording in a dungeon or something. It's just fucking amazing. It stands up to this day as one of the heaviest records and the definitive black metal record. I don't really care what anybody says about Bathory or any of those Norwegian bands. Black metal is the fucking heaviest black metal record ever made.
Well said, well said. So you seem to be, you know, pretty tapped into kind of what was happening in the early 80s kind of metal underground, I would say, you know, from what I've read and from what you've kind of testimonial on. Was it pretty apparent like that Venom was doing something pretty unique? Or did you just kind of see them as an extension of like what like Motorhead and Tank and a few of the other bands were kind of doing?
Motorhead, I'm sorry, Venom really stood out from the pack when it came to, you know, the supposed, you know, their involvement in the new wave of British heavy metal. They're a band that I always looked at as more of like outsider music. You know, they weren't really part of anyone's scene. They did their own thing. They didn't follow any movement. They didn't try to, you know, have any sort of camaraderie with other bands. They were like, fuck you, we're the best. We blow everyone away. We're the most evil fucking band you've ever seen. And they never fucking kissed up to anybody or tried to like jump on an opening slot for a tour. They were headliners from the day they were born. And you know, they talked shit about Merciful Fate, which was hilarious. It was great for press and everything, you know. So I just always thought they were sort of like outside of any movement like new wave of British heavy metal or anything like that, much the way that Motorhead were, you know, like just sort of like Motorhead didn't need any sort of category or genre to fit into. They were Motorhead, and feel like Venom were equally or even more so just unique in their approach and their delivery of the whole package, you know.
Especially, it seems like, you know, something a couple of other people we've interviewed have mentioned, and I know they were, you know, punk and hardcore and Discharge and some of that stuff was kind of mixing into the influence pool when you guys first started to put together, you know, Genocide and eventually Repulsion. Could you hear kind of the punky elements in Venom a little bit too, or was that something that you kind of found appealing once you started to discover more punk? You could kind of see like, oh, Venom's got some of that raw kind of punk energy, or?
Yeah, I wasn't really into punk yet in 1982 because I had never really had anybody expose me to it, and I didn't really seek it out just because, to my experience at the time, bands with short hair just weren't that heavy, you know. So like once I started hearing those bands, like I remember the first time I heard the Sex Pistols record probably wasn't until like 1982. And I was like, oh shit, I should have fucking bought this when it came out, because this is totally my kind of music. But I had never heard it. I just saw the photos of them and figured that they sounded like the, you know, synthy sort of lightish new wave bands that I'd been hearing on the radio or seeing on SNL and American Bandstand. I had no idea that the Sex Pistols were such a fucking ferocious, you know, wall of sound. So when I discovered punk, I instantly just was like, it was like an epiphany. Like I just was like, holy shit, I missed out on all of this stuff because I had no idea how heavy and guitar driven it was, you know. And it really wasn't that much different than Venom, other than like the sort of, you know, lyrical concept and maybe the melodies, but or lack thereof, you know. It's just like it was very similar. Like Black Flag and Venom are kind of like equally as heavy, you know. It's just different approaches.
Absolutely, absolutely. So like when you guys, you know, kind of bubbling up in this new, what became known, I guess, as the extreme metal, American underground, Venom gets a lot of credit for having influenced a lot of the various genres, whether it be death, thrash, black, being a band from that era, how much of an influence do you think they were having on those kind of, burgeoning kind of subgenres that were starting to bubble up? Or is that overstated? Or, where in your estimation does that fall?
I think that Motorhead probably deserves the most credit for sort of like bridging the gap between punk and metal, because it started in England, and the new wave of British heavy metal was sort of like a response to punk in a way, not like a rebellious response, but more like a, hey, look what those guys over there are doing, like we can do that too. We can put out our own records and promote our own gigs, and that sort of part of the DIY portion of punk really rubbed off on the metal bands in the UK scene. And that didn't really catch on in America because we just didn't have that many quality heavy metal acts between, like, say, you had some stuff bubbling up in LA, but in my opinion, a lot of people like that stuff, but there's a lot of the early LA metal bands that I just didn't think were all that interesting, really, compared to their British counterparts. Like there was no band in LA or New York in 1980 like Angel Witch or Venom or Witchfinder General or bands like that. You had, no offense, but you had bands like Bitch and Steeler, and they just weren't the same. They just weren't the same thing. And so yeah, I don't think that that influence really caught on. So you could say yes. To make a long story short, Venom did have probably a huge influence on that in America, because they were the first band where I saw, I had started getting into punk, and I saw, like, before, like some of the first punk shows I went to, there were no more long hairs besides like me and Matt Olivo or whichever other friend I dragged along to the shows. There weren't any other long hairs at those shows back then, but you would see a couple guys with like Liberty spikes that had Venom patches on their jackets and shit like that. So yeah, Venom definitely bridged that gap. And probably if you were to ask, COC and bands like that who were more like reared on punk rock, and sort of came to the center of the metal punk, crossroads, they probably would say that Venom made them say, oh, metal isn't that bad. There's actually some good metal,
Yeah, there's almost like a bridge with like Amoebics and like Venom meeting, kind of almost like right in that nuclear center there or something.
Yeah. And of course, Discharge and GBH were very easy to digest for a Motorhead fan, which is how, my first real exposure to punk was talking outside of like a Exploited show or something that I had gone to somebody with a Venom patch on their jacket and saying, oh, if you like Exploited, you'll like GBH and Discharge and the Verukers and all these bands. And so I started going down that whole like Clay Records. That changed everything really for me, like, wanting to make my songs really short, and guitar solos were completely unimportant. They're cool, but they don't have to be there, or they can just be noisy, like Repulsion guitar solos,
Sure.
which have their own brilliance to them. But yeah, it definitely was a big influence for me at that point, to see that crossover happening for sure. And Venom were central to that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and it seems like I was talking to Away from Voivod about this yesterday. It seems like there's a little bit of the DNA of like the Kronos bass tone and like what you were doing with the bass, what Blackie was doing with the bass. What is that, like, overstated, or was that kind of a subconscious influence maybe?
No, I mean the my bass sound was influenced by, like, as far as like bigger names, it was definitely Blackie and Kronos and Lemmy and Rainey from Discharge, and then also from a local musician, Tanya Narhi from Dissonance, who used a rat pedal through her Ampeg, I think she had back then. I was just like this is fucking cool, like I think she was probably the first person I heard live having that like insane sort of bass tone. So yeah, that kind of stuff was a huge influence. And absolutely Voivod, who were clearly influenced by Venom and Motorhead, were a huge influence on Repulsion, and in particular my bass sound and the approach to the vocals and everything.
Awesome. So when it comes to those first two records, do you have specific kind of thoughts or preferences of like songs, or is there one between Welcome and Black Metal that you still like think more nostalgically about now, or is it equal in different ways? I've always been asking people that question,
Man, that's tough. After all these years, it's tough to choose a favorite. But I mean, I definitely, when Black Metal came out, my love for Venom went from like 90 to 150. I already loved Venom. And I think there was a single, the Bloodlust in Nomine Satanas single in between the records, which showed that like musical progression they were making as far as like making the vocals more understandable, just a little bit, still rough. That's something that I've always liked. And Nick Anderson from Entombed and Helicopters, Death Breath, and we've talked about it at length. Death metal vocals are great, but you still should be, to me, it's a little too, you lose the whole point if you take it to the extreme where you can't understand what you're saying. Like this kind of loses it for me. So like, I suppose I'm a little bit conservative there, where I like my extremity dialed back, just pushed right up against the wall, but still on the musical side of the fence where you can understand the vocals and whatnot. So Black Metal had that quality, and it had those great lyrics. And yeah, I suppose if I had to take one album to a desert island, it would be Black Metal. But Welcome to Hell, the song, and Schizo and Poison and Red Light Fever and the backwards messaging and everything that was completely unnecessary, because there were worse things written on the album cover than that. But yeah, I mean, I was scared by Welcome to Hell, where Black Metal was just like, I was already in the Venom's legions by that point. So there was no more, I wasn't scared anymore. I mean, honestly, I said this before, I think Jay Bennett like laughed and maybe even made a quote out of it in an interview or something, that when I said like Venom was I think I might have said it on stage one time or something. I said Venom was the band that turned me on to Satan. And it's true. I mean, I bought the Satanic Bible. I didn't want to be a Satanist. I was just curious about like, I wasn't sure at the time how serious Venom were, until I started reading interviews and realizing, it was all sort of like a put on. But Venom and Merciful Fate definitely got me interested in the dark side. And I started reading a lot of books and about the occult and Satanism and whatnot. And I found it all to be pretty boring when I got into the nuts and bolts of it all. But it did indeed inspire me to go down that rabbit hole. And obviously some other kids, did that and didn't turn out so great. But yeah, so that stuff was definitely an influence. So
yeah, no, that's cool. Generationally, for me being a little bit younger than you, I think it was our discovery of, I think simultaneously, like we got Rain and Blood from Columbia House when we were like in middle school, and then we also got Covenant from Morbid Angel. And I remember we'd like stare at each other when we were listening to the tape, and that was pre-CDs, and we'd be like, should we be listening to this shit? Like, do we need to turn this off? And my buddy's like, man, I don't know. But yeah, that was the appeal, right? It scared the shit out of us. And then of course you find out, especially at least with Slayer, wrestling kayfabe essentially. It was like character they're building. Morbid Angel tried to play it off as more serious, I guess, but we never really were that scared after a certain point. So it's funny, King Folly, I interviewed him a couple days ago, and he was telling a story about playing Welcome to Hell for the first time, and like he kind of thought like ghosts were visiting him, and just everybody has that weird gateway thing.
I've read King's recounting of his supernatural experience, even in his book,
stairs coming down. Yep.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
love that guy.
Oh man, that interview
So
was
many great stories.
fantastic. Yeah, he had some real fun stuff to say. Um,
Absolutely.
I guess, it's kind of as we kind of wrap up, what about how far did your Venom fandom go? Because we are going to be kind of covering the sort of second era, the post black metal stuff in a part 2 episode. Did you get into At War with Satan or Possessed or any of that stuff? And or were you kind of on your own thing by that point?
I definitely liked At War with Satan. Um, I was a little disappointed in it. It was just, they had kind of like dialed back the heaviness a little bit, and the songwriting wasn't quite as strong, I didn't think, and the lyrics. The song At War with Satan is a fucking masterpiece, but the second side of the record was leaning a little more towards like getting into the sort of like B-level Neat Records output,
Mhm.
like they didn't really seem to be like setting the pace anymore. And of course, by then, Show No Mercy was out, and that sort of annihilated everything. I can't remember exactly when At War with Satan was released, but I think it was before Chemical Warfare, which was another just complete fucking atomic bomb on the metal scene. When that EP came out, it was just kind of like, wow, Slayer could actually get heavier and faster than they were on Show No Mercy. It was kind of mind blowing at the time. So yeah, I thought Venom started to slow down a bit, and then of course seeing them live was kind of disappointing because I saw them at the beginning of that tour they did with Slayer and Exodus, who, two bands who were like, on fire at the moment. And Mantis wasn't allowed, from what I understand, what everyone was saying at the time, he had like chicken pox or some sort of virus, and wasn't allowed to enter the States in time for the tour to start. So the first couple weeks of that US tour, they had a couple of fill-in guitar players, and it just wasn't the same. Not only that, I saw the show in Cleveland where there was a city ordinance against pyro. So they weren't allowed to use the pyro. Yeah, just, overall it was quite a disappointment. And of course, that was in spring of '85. It was like maybe 2 weeks or something before Matt and I left for Florida to play with Death. And of course, by that summer, we started hearing bands like Slaughter and all the German thrash bands, Sodom and all that stuff, had demos out, and we're starting to release EPs, Creator, Sodom, Destruction, etc. And everything was just getting heavier, and our songwriting was getting heavier, and we were gaining confidence in our songwriting to where we were like, my fucking songs are better than what Venom's putting out right now. So no offense to Venom, but we got our own confidence, and at that point it was kind of like, I didn't care. And yeah, that Possessed record, I didn't think much of it at the time. I haven't listened. I bought a box set like 2 Christmases ago or something, I think, that has that record in it, and I still haven't bothered to listen to it. I've been meaning to sit down and give it a fair shake, but I remember when it came out, it just didn't do anything for me. And so, but I mean, I still love, Venom for what they did. And I've seen Venom since, and they've put on an amazing show. We played with them in Finland a few years ago, and they were just fucking incredible. And I've seen Venom Inc. a few times, also great. I liked it a lot more when Abaddon or Abaddon was still in the band, but it was still cool. They put on a great show. Their musical legacy, just from that early stuff, will just stand forever. They can't do anything to really tarnish that because it's set in stone. And massive influence on me, and to the point where over the summer I played a show with Entombed in Sweden, where we had like several guest vocalists singing for Entombed at a Swedish metal fest, and one of them was Kronos. It was myself, Kronos, a girl named Pia. I can't remember the name of her band right now, but and also Johnny Hedlund from Unleashed, and Tompa from At the Gates, and we sort of and Kronos was there, and when he came to rehearsal, we were all just sort of like shitting ourselves, the whole with all the accomplishment that everybody in that room has had, the guys from Entombed and Repulsion at the Gates and Unleashed, and we're still all just sort of like shitting ourselves, and Kronos showed up. So he still has that aura, and like he's got a great sense of humor. He said some funny stuff. He was fantastic. But yeah, we were all sort of in awe when Kronos showed up, which was kind of amazing that he still holds that power over us after 40 plus years.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I've met Kronos once, and it was funny. It was actually with it was right after I met Mark for the very first time. Chris Dick, is how I met Mark. Chris and I were working at the record store together, and he was like, "Hey, you want to go to this Milwaukee Metal Fest thing?" And I just graduated high school. I just 18, whatever. And he's like, "Yeah, we're going." My buddy Mark, who's working at Relapse, who does Requiem with me, the magazine, and blah blah blah. Like, he's coming back. We're gonna go. And so we rode together. That's when I met Mark, and we ended up. That was when Venom reformed in '97 to play that show, and it was Danny Filth's birthday party, and somehow we got press passes or whatever to go backstage, and we were eating birthday cake with Kronos and like Dan Lochner and shit, and like I was super overwhelmed as like an 18-year-old from Mount Pleasant, right? I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? Like, and I would actually be more in awe now, because now I know more about Venom. I didn't know that much about him in '97 because Venom's legacy was kind of, well in the past, and I was pre-internet, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, so I have these pictures, like they're actually up in my classroom of like me and like Kronos, like eating birthday cake and shit. And kids are always like, "Who is that?" I'm like, it's a guy from a famous metal band and shit. But it's like, yeah, it's cool, that those guys still have that legacy. I mean, when I interviewed Tom G around Thanksgiving, I was just like, the reverence, it's like, oh man, it's Godfather, here he is. And he's, they're both super friendly guys, and I mean, that's the cool thing about that underground metal world, so, but cool, Scott. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is going to be awesome. And I'll let you know when we have this kind of thrown together, if you, feel free to promote it or do whatever and all that kind of good stuff. So, I'm definitely looking forward to all the stuff that Mark's putting together for the book with you guys.
Oh yeah, I owe him some stuff right now.
Yeah, it's going to be sweet. And I see the Venom poster in the background there.
Oh yeah, I mean that wasn't intentional, but
no.
I mean that's not there's two Venom posters in this room. Actually, there's one over on this wall as well. So that tells you something, right? Like how much I was just thinking, I was just glancing over. I pulled this out to look at it.
Yeah.
This is my copy that I bought at Grapevine Records back in the day with the original lyric sheet and the intro to At War with Satan on there, and this amazing little poster. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but
I've heard about it. I don't know if I have.
Yeah, there was this poster that they used to put these in a lot of neat records, and of course, the Kronos picture there. He's like on a leash with a naked woman, like has him on a leash. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things. And look at the way his autograph is there. Like that's highly satanic.
Yeah.
And
looks like a Savage Grace cover or whatever.
Yeah, that was the sort of things that endeared Kronos to us. And as I'm glancing at this, I'm remembering like the first sort of iteration of Repulsion, we were called Tempter. This is when Matt and I just started sort of getting serious about being in a band. And we didn't have enough originals when we started playing live, so we were doing a lot of covers. And we were doing Heaven's on Fire from this record. And one of the guitar players had a real problem with the satanic shit. And every time, the really fucking satanic parts of the lyrics came up, like, do you believe in God? He's chained up like a dog, and every hour he screams, blah, blah, blah. I would just look over at him, and he'd have his head down, like shaking his head at the lyrics. So it was almost like, just sort of torture to make him play that song. Like,
that's funny. Yeah.
I'm not going to delete that one from the set because it just bums him out so bad.
We had one of my best friends in high school. Like, he hung out with us, but he was definitely like a church going. We used to call him Ned Flanders because we never heard him swear. But for some reason, he just hung out with us, and we were fucking listening to death metal and you name it, you know, and crazy, like, you know, gangster rap shit. And he was along for the ride, but he never partook. He just kind of, but he didn't judge. It was weird. You know, it's kind of an interesting perspective, you know.
I think a lot of, you know, like, I mean, if you're in high school and you're a churchy kid, you're probably more of an outsider than somebody who's listening to satanic heavy metal. So, especially by the time your age group came around, you know, like, I mean, when we were teenagers, I mean, in high school, you know, my high school was like in downtown Flint. It was very inner city, and it was definitely not cool to be like a metalhead, even like amongst the white kids that liked Sammy Hagar and Van Halen. Like, if you played Motorhead, they would just be like, turn that shit off, you know. They weren't scared of it or offended by it. They just thought it was crap, you know. So we had no friends. Like, our little group of friends, we hung out with those people, but I hung out with nerds just as much, because I liked comic books and I liked horror films. And you know, you were probably more accepting of that kid, that churchy kid, than anybody else in the school, you know, anybody else that was around at that time. So he probably just felt safe with you guys because you weren't judging him.
Yeah.
Know?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Well said. Well said. Yeah. Cause Mount Pleasant had that definitely that dynamic, you know. I remember guys like, and this isn't even that edgy, but you know, when we were freshmen in 93, you know, we were the ones, you know, talking about grunge and Helmet and Monster Magnet and all that kind of stuff. You know, we weren't even trying to like proselytize like Morbid Angel to people, because, you know, we knew what we'd be up against. And then, like, you know, people would be like, oh, what is that fucking shit you guys? And then, like, by the time we were senior year, I had all these like jocks coming up to me and like talking to me about like, hey man, you guys were like into like cool stuff that like now I discovered Clutch, or, you know, it's like cool,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that was the same even with Motley Crue, for instance. I remember, like, when we were in high school, me and my buddy Sean, we both had the Too Fast for Love leather records, Motley Crue record. And you know, we try to play it at parties and stuff, and people were just like, that's fucking lame. All the burnout kids we knew, you know, the kids that we smoked pot and experimented with drugs with and hung out on the weekends at parties and stuff, they were all into like Triumph and Ozzy Osbourne. And Ozzy was like, Ozzy was the evil Ozzy. They thought Ozzy was so evil, it was hilarious, you know, because we were already listening to Venom and Motley Crue and whatever. I mean, Motley Crue was sort of like a band that we just sort of accepted into they were the lightest, most lightweight band we were listening to at that time, but there was just something kind of punky and raw and like cool about that first Motley Crue record. Again, to use that outsider term again, it just was like, it didn't really fit in with anything else. So they just seemed like they were doing their own thing. The influences are obvious, you know, but you know, in 1981 you didn't hear a lot of bands that were throwing out The Sweet and Stars and New York Dolls as influences. So
yeah,
that was cool. But yeah, trying to get people to listen to Motley Crue in 81, 82 was a chore. And 6 months later, when they went on tour with Ozzy, like every fucking kid in high school had a Motley Crue painter's cap and a bandana. And what are you gonna do?
I know. Yeah,
same thing happened with Metallica and Slayer. You go down the line, and and grunge was the same way, right?
We're just people ahead of our times. What can we do?
We've all seen the Kmart ads from the late 80s, early 90s, or I think it's the early 90s actually, where there's like a get into grunge. And it was like a whole like spread in a Kmart like ad. Flannel shirts and combat boots and shit.
Yeah, it's like when your mom likes that Pearl Jam ballot, it's like it's all downhill from there. So
yeah.
All right, well, cool. Thanks, Scott. I do appreciate it, and I'll let you know when all this is kind of rocking and rolling, and just, you know, feel free to share it and stuff like that if you want. So.
I will, for sure. Send my regards to Mark and tell him to please ping me with anything that he still needs for the book. I know I owe him a couple of scans and things like that. So
okay, yeah, I'll be talking tomorrow when we record the episode for sure. So
awesome.
All right, take care, dude. Yep, have a good one. All right, bye.